We're back at it. That's my guy, Ron. I'm Chris. We got more Ohio State coverage, more college football coverage. Can you believe it? We're already entering, week 11 of the college football season, dog?
It's week 11. It surprised me every time I type the name of the show, and I'm like, wow, we are just flying through this season. But the Buckeyes get a top 5 win, so I'm not feeling too
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, dude. No, feeling really good, man. But again, the season's flying. But here we are, week 11 of the season. Things are winding down a little bit for Ohio State. Obviously, got the big dogs coming down the pipe, or what was supposed to be the big dogs, and defending national champion Michigan, and the big dogs might end up being Indiana. Who knows? And then obviously the Big Ten title game. But we're here to deliver some more Ohio State football content for you here on the Bleacher Report app. I guess we can get right into it though. For starters, dog. I mean, what a time to be alive. We beat James Franklin, right? Some things never change, I guess.
It feels it's like a duality of being a Buckeye fan going into the game. It's like, man, the Buckeyes better not lose or Ryan Day's out of here.
Yeah.
And then after you get past the game, it's like, well, I mean, it's just James Franklin, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can't really win beating Penn State. You only get credit for losing to them. So, I mean, the Buckeyes go in there and handle business and continue their reign of dominance over James Franklin. And I feel like it speaks to the Buckeyes and calms Buckeye fans, including myself, who were worried going into that game and felt like the Buckeyes may be slipping from that national top tier and regressing back into top 4 team in the Big Ten.
It's always a good reminder of what Ohio State could be. Like, it's always a good reminder that, like, if Ohio State didn't have the talent or didn't have the coaching, what they could look like. I love that Penn State was good and that it kind of operates as like a top 5 win on the Ohio State resume. And for a team that year in and year out kind of plays us pretty tough, it's surprising they haven't gotten a win since 2016, because it feels like every one of those games is so competitive, very few blowouts. And yet still, they haven't beat Ohio State in over 10 years.
Absolutely. And do you think that speaks more to the struggles that Penn State has or the dominance of Ohio State?
I think it's the dominance, and I think a lot of it also has to do with it's a big game without feeling the big game tightness, because beating them is kind of like a foregone conclusion. Like against Michigan, there feels like there's a big game tightness because Ryan Day and Ohio State know, okay, if I lose this game, legitimately, I could get fired no matter how good we are. With that game in particular, it feels like there's less tightness, I think, if that makes sense. I mean, especially just generally speaking, because James Franklin is the one that goes in that game super tight.
Absolutely. And you saw the mistakes in 4K by James Franklin, multiple just coaching I guess blunders that
gaffes, I think is
gaffes. I don't even know the best word for them, because it just seems like James Franklin finds a way to get in his own way, whether it's undisciplined plays like the unsportsmanlike conducts, the over celebrations after touchdowns, or if it's just the fumbling of the clock at the end of quarters or in tight situations. And some of those game management flaws are things that James Franklin's not going to be able to escape. While sometimes I feel like the expectations for him are too high. I mean, people criticizing James Franklin after a top 5 matchup. I've never heard in the history of James Franklin as a head coach someone say that James Franklin's a top 5 coach. So why do they think he's going to win top 5 games or remain as a top 5 team? I think James Franklin does well with what he has, but he does also deserve some of the blame when you see these massive blunders in these huge games. And while people have frustrations with Ryan Day and his inability to get it done in the big game, I think Ryan Day's definition of big game and failures is different than the standard that they have for James Franklin.
Yeah, man. After the game, I jumped into a Penn State, show, one of the reaction shows, and the biggest complaint and the argument that was taking place in this show was people believed, without even listening to James Franklin, without listening to anybody, that late in that game, when they got the ball under the 2-yard line, people believed that James Franklin took over Andy Kotelnicki's play calling. Because there's no way they don't direct snap to Warren, the big tight end, and go over the top like they've been going all year. People believe that James Franklin somehow found a way to mess that one up as well.
I mean, who do you give the most amount of blame to in that scenario that they make it down into the red zone at that point and you don't get a single touch for Tyler Warren in that scenario?
I give the most blame to Kotelnicki, but like 49% of the blame, I give it to James Franklin, because all he has to do is get on the headset and say, "Hey, what about that one play, that one direct snap leak that we've been running all season on the goal line to him? Is that in play here?" Because like at the end of the day, like you're the head ball coach. Like,
Yeah, I mean, and we've also seen Penn State in the past 2 years use those two running backs with a tight end in the backfield formation, where you're having all of these backs back there and you have no idea where they're going with the ball. You didn't see anything with that. They try to get cute and they split a tackle out wide. And I mean, even on some of the plays where they're motioning him back in motion and he hits the hole, and he's he's hitting Caleb Downs, and Caleb Downs is shutting the block and getting involved on the play. Even when you go to your strength, this is supposed to be an opportunity for you to bring this tackle and just completely clear out the way in front of them and get an easy goal line stand. And the Buckeyes, I mean, shouts out to Caden McDonald, to Caleb Downs, all of these guys that really showed up in the goal line, and the Buckeyes really showed what I felt like was something that people have been saying for years that the Buckeyes lack, and I think it was on full display this past weekend. And it was their toughness. The Buckeyes have played, as you said, this Penn State team very close in years past, and the Buckeyes, for I think the first time since Justin Fields departed the Buckeyes felt like the more physical and tougher team on Saturday.
yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Shout out to the Georgia boys, man. K Mac and Caleb Downs, kids from Georgia coming up here and really causing some damage. I would have loved to see Andrew Kotelnicki just like run the jet sweep to that tackle. Nobody was respecting the big man getting out there, dude. Nobody respected it.
How are we talking about this though if he fumbles?
Yeah. Like an all-time James Franklin blunder, dude. Like an all-time James Franklin blunder. But I was really excited, man. It was really cool. And I'm going to talk about that game in a sec here, a little bit more, kind of more nitty-gritty. But I do want to ask you thoughts about Ohio State being number 2 in the initial college football playoff rankings.
We had a little bit of discussion before the show about, I mean, how much does it mean, too, if number 1 is in your conference?
Yeah, literally nothing.
You know what I mean? It's kind of for show. What does the number mean if Oregon stays at number 1? I do think it is a vote of confidence for Buckeyes and Buckeye fans that people are back in on the hype train after it felt like the cool thing to do is to jump off the ship of the Buckeyes. And it feels like people are back in on a lot of people's preseason favorites. And after they struggled a little bit at Nebraska and then bouncing back from the Oregon loss, I feel like people are back in on this Buckeye team because they showed two things that Buckeye fans came into the season confident about this team and then wavered towards the middle of the year as they started to struggle. And that was the ability to run the ball and show toughness. And they already weathered one storm on the offensive line as far as an early season injury from Donovan Jackson. And now you see Donovan Jackson kick out the tackle, and the Buckeyes are trying to continue to weather another storm in the loss of Josh Simmons at left tackle. And they seem to do a pretty good job against one of the premier pass rushers in the country in Abdul Carter this past weekend.
I think the rankings coming right after this Penn State game made it really, really easy to put Ohio State at 2. Like, really easy. Like, Ohio State showed everything you want a championship team to show. They showed depth on the O-line, like you just referenced. They showed the ability to out-tough a tough team. Again, they traveled. They went on the road. It's a road top 5 matchup. Both of their top 5 matchups being away from the shoe. They showed an ability to climb back into a game. Obviously, going down 10-0 early. Some people were looking around like, "Oh shoot, what have we done?"
Not some people. Ron James was looking around like, I lied about this team. It's not who I thought they were.
I was too. Hey, that first pick 6 is hard to watch, dude. That was hard to watch.
It was painful, but I feel like, again, that should give Buckeyes even more confidence because we've seen Will now perform in 2 hostile environments. I think his performance against Oregon was much better than the one against Penn State, but to see him not crumble, and I feel like that's one thing that I feel like Buckeyes are really thankful about when it comes to Will Howard versus their quarterback experience last year, that it felt like when Buckeyes got down, that worry and that doom and gloom radiated throughout the team, and it spread from the quarterback position, and you could see the bad body language. And it feels like even when Will is struggling, he's unfazed, and the team not only believes in him, and it feels like this team has a belief that they are supposed to win every week that wasn't there necessarily in years past.
Yeah, I agree. He's got the stop the bleeding in him. He's got the I'm gonna get this team to the finish line no matter what. Where Kyle McCord kind of felt a little bit like Jake Delahome. For those who don't know, it's like once you bleed, you really bleed. I'm bleeding everywhere and I can't stop, and I'm bleeding all over your white T-shirt, and everybody's losing. So the committee told us one thing, and it's that they believe that Oregon is by far and away the best team in the country. Ohio State played that team very, very close on the road. So it's like naturally they'd be the number 2 team. It also feels like this is very wide open, which I love. How are you feeling about Ohio State's chances if they do get to a rematch with Oregon in the Big Ten title game?
I feel like the Buckeyes have an opportunity to avenge their loss, but it's going to require a near flawless game from the Buckeyes. And we talked about last week that it feels like in the Ryan Day era, we're constantly having these conversations about one side of the ball not clicking at the same time as the other side of the ball. The Buckeyes are going to need a complete performance from both their offense and defense if they want to get it done against Oregon. It's going to be an even tougher task than it was the first time. I know the saying it's hard to beat a team 2 times in 1 year, but while the Buckeyes did play Oregon close and it was a 1-point loss, you have to acknowledge the context of that game and the fact that Oregon played without their number 2 wide receiver due to a bonehead move early in the game and an ejection. They played without their best pass rusher.
Yep.
And the Buckeyes lost their starting left tackle.
Yeah.
Can the Buckeyes overcome all of these things and still win the Big Ten? Absolutely. But we would be lying to ourselves if we didn't say it was an even taller task for the Buckeyes this time around.
Yeah, I agree. It does feel like it's a little bit of a taller task. And also it feels like Oregon seems like they're really getting better every week still. Oregon's got a chance to do something really special this year. And this is something that we know Dan Lanning was kind of building towards. They feel like an SEC team, but they have like a little bit of like their Big 12 offense, I guess, on the flip side of it. Is there a team you wouldn't want to see or would want to see in the first round of the playoffs? Because right now, even though they're the number 2 team, they'd be the number 5 seed. And if it was today, they would be playing, I believe, Boise State in round 1 and then BYU in round 2. Could the 5 seed be a blessing in disguise for Ohio State?
I think absolutely. If the Buckeyes are able to avoid the SEC or a rematch with Oregon in the second round, I feel like that's the Buckeyes' best hope for a path to the national championship. The idea that the Buckeyes could potentially have to play Oregon 3 times in one season to win a natty, I feel like that's the one thing that I don't like about the 12-team playoff and the open divisions in conferences, because it sounded cool, but I don't know how much Buckeye fans or even Big Ten fans or college football fans at large are going to love seeing certain matchups 3 times a year and the implications that has on the playoffs. So I aside from being on the same side of the bracket, I do think as Oregon, I do think it is a blessing for the Buckeyes. I think the Buckeye fans, when they look at that bracket, they're really licking their chops at the opportunity to potentially be one if they're able to handle business in Indianapolis.
So Ohio State has played 8 games so far this year, Ron. They could potentially play 9 more. Think about how absurd that is.
I mean, we're talking about it feeling like the season is flying by, but then when you put it in perspective like that, if the Buckeyes plan to achieve all of the goals that they set at the beginning of the season, they're not even halfway done.
Yeah, dude, it's insane. I do want to talk a little bit more about the Penn State game, kind of what Ohio State has moving forward. First game this year, man, that Jeremiah Smith did not catch a touchdown pass.
I know, and you've been saying all year he's on pace to have a catch per game. We've talked about it a couple of times. He does have a touchdown in the bag, so we're still on pace for a touchdown per game. But it seems like the Buckeyes had to ask other people to be a part of this and to step up. And you saw Brandon Ennis answer the call. And we've been pounding the table about our SFE guys, and you see BI get in the game and be able to get on the board. You saw a few new faces for Buckeye fans. You saw Jelani Thurman come up with a big catch, and that's going to be a name to keep an eye on for Buckeye fans with the injury to Will Kazmarek and the opportunities that's going to open up for Jelani, and seeing him be able to get that catch. I think he might have been even a little surprised that the ball actually came to him. Yeah. You saw other guys step up. The running game gets back on track. Trey and Quinshawn both back above 5 yards per carry this past week. So while it's disappointing to not see the Jeremiah show every week, I'll take it knowing that a lot of guys who hadn't been called upon in the past found ways to make big plays in this past game. And I still think we're waiting on the Carnell Tate explosion, and it's going to happen here in the next couple of weeks. Once these teams continue to come in and tell the Buckeyes what they're going to allow them to do, and the Buckeyes take it and win accordingly. And I feel like one of those games is coming up where someone's going to either roll the dice and say, well, make the true freshman beat us, and he will, or you're going to see why they were 7-on-7 national champions, and Ohio State has an entire room of South Florida Express wide receivers.
Dog, Chip Kelly pulling the okie doke on James Franklin is top 5 funniest thing that nobody has talked about yet. No one's touchdown pass to Brandon Ennis. Ohio State trotted out their 3 receivers who never play.
We saw Jaden Ballard out there and taking meaningful snaps, and the fact that that wasn't a red flag for the entire Penn State staff, I don't know how they could have known that a Brandon Ennis touchdown was coming, but Ohio State fans have been banging the drum for years, rotate the receivers more, get more guys in, and they just did a full-on hockey switch at the receiver position, and it didn't raise any suspicions to Penn State.
No, only that one time. And it was like you bring out the receivers that we never throw the ball to. So our whole defense is going to play run and try to blow up the quarterback because we know you're not going to throw the ball, right? There's no way you throw the ball with those 3 out there. Chip Kelly throws the ball and we get a BI touchdown, which to me, long overdue. He needs to be out there. And if there's ever going to be a game where Jeremiah does not catch a touchdown, the least they can do for me is give me a Brandon Ennis touchdown, who honestly of that group is my favorite receiver.
Absolutely. We may not have kept our pace for Jeremiah Smith touchdown every game, but we are on pace for SFE touchdown every game. So shout out to South Florida Express and the impact that they're having on Zone 6.
All right, Doug, I do want to talk about what we learned about this Ohio State team from this game, including someone being picked up off the lost and found list, man.
Why didn't they check this box weeks ago? Like, it was like they sat around in the Woody and said, if only we had a Power 5 starter that we could put in on the offensive line that started 12 games last year. Don't know where we could find one of those. Oh, wait, we have Carson Hinsman, our former starting center that started an entire season as a freshman and then was relegated to the bench and skipped over numerous times this year when opportunities have presented themselves on the offensive line. What happened inside the Woody that they finally said, hey, we have to play Carson?
Conspiracy theory. I'm fully convinced that Justin Fry or Coach Locke went to Ryan Day and was like, look, I know he did the podcast. I know everybody's mad, but he started every game last year for us out of position. He was one of the top guards in the country from Wisconsin coming out of high school. He's 6'5", 300 pounds. You take out the fact that you take out the snapping the ball issue and he can just go get downhill. There is not a soul in America, not even the man himself, could tell me that he wasn't a top 3 or top 2 guard on this team all year.
I mean, you saw Ryan Day get testy in his press conference a few weeks ago when people asked him, essentially, are you sure you know who your best 5 linemen are? Because we cover this team and have known most of these guys since they were 15, 16 years old, and I'm not convinced that you understand who your top 5 are. And you see the way the offensive line looks this past week, and it seems like they were right.
1,000,000% right. Hinsman is the second best guard on the whole roster. He's better than Tegra. He's better than Austin. He's better than Luke. What do those three guys have in common? They all saw the field this year at guard before Carson Hinsman, all because of a stupid podcast.
So, Chris, for those who aren't familiar with this story or the podcast or the name Carson Hinsman, maybe they were under a rock last year and aren't familiar with who our starting center was last year and the fact that he just disappeared for months on end after the season last year. We saw Carson Hinsman miss the Cotton Bowl last year, and now Washington guard Enoch Vamahi get the start and struggle mightily, so much so we lost the quarterback during that performance, and the coaching staff didn't even blink because they felt so good in their decision to bench Carson Hinsman for comments made during an off-season podcast where he hinted at the fact that maybe Ohio State offensive linemen aren't paid the greatest.
Yeah, all he did was tell the truth. I watched that whole podcast start to finish because I clipped some of it up and put it on my Twitter, and all he was basically like, no, me on the offensive line, like some of us don't really get paid. Like that's kind of just for like the premier guys, which literally just a Wisconsin kid telling the truth. And then boom, vanished.
Relegated to the shadow realms. It felt like he had been banished, and I didn't even think that we would see Carson Hinsman again on this team, and the situation got so dire, and it felt like prior to the Josh Simmons injury, they were committed to not playing Carson Hinsman this year.
Yeah, this was going to be look what you made me do, Carson. We lost this game because I couldn't play you because you did a podcast. That's exactly what it was. And then I think, so, like our guy Seaball and my guy C in the comments, someone probably got to Ryan Day. Ryan Day, podcast be darned. We got to win a natty or it's a massive disappointment. And if he gives us the best chance and we get to move him back to his natural position, Kid Bald. I'm really happy for the kid. Kid Bald, and what was it? 4 of the 5 offensive linemen got player of the game. He was one of them. Shout out Carson Hinsman, man. Shout out Carson Hinsman.
Shout out to Carson Hinsman. And again, a guy that I know is not very popular in Buckeye lore and I think deserves a shout out. It's Justin Fry.
Yep, absolutely.
I feel like we issue a challenge to Justin Fry weekly with the injuries that we've seen on this offensive line, and it's like, get it right. And anytime we see someone struggle and they may not have it right at the moment, you see people run straight to the timeline and talk about the depth issues, the misses in recruiting in the past, and how they're starting to burn the Buckeyes now. And Justin Fry is constantly there. I don't know if it's a fire extinguisher or a glass of water to throw on that hot seat every time that temperature starts to get too high. And he always seems to find an answer and find a group of 5 that are able to play. And at this point, I don't know how you can argue that he has to go after the season with the way he's been able to weather the storm, because I don't know how many people with the current room that they have would have been able to continue to keep finding 5 offensive linemen that are able to play and gel together and take the step forward that we saw the offensive line take last week.
Yeah, this cripbles most line coaches, and for him to do this was really big time. And more power to him. It hasn't always been fun with Justin. There's been moments where it's been really not fun. There's been moments where the recruiting's been really bad, but at the end of the day, like I watched this offensive line at the end of this game. I mean, look, think about this game in its whole. They won that game. I'm about to say it wrong. Shoot. Like a quintessential Bama team that had Jay Coker or AJ McCarron at quarterback. Like, get a goal line stop, and then I'm just going to keep throwing body blows. And what did Justin Fry and Ryan Day say? I want people to know we're going to run the football and not be able to stop us. I hate to break it to everybody here. Everybody's known when we're going to run, and they've all stopped us up until that game and that drive. And that is a turning point in potentially this offensive line group, and a turning point. I mean, we saw Donovan Jackson's quotes, a turning point for maybe the philosophy of Ryan Day as well.
We saw how that game ended with 10 straight runs. Chris, I know it may turn some Buckeye fans' stomach reminiscent of someone up north. We watched Sharon Moore do the exact same thing. And I believe it was over 20 straight run plays against Penn State in the second half last year. Decided, hey, tackle us. Show me that you're as tough as us and that you can tackle us and match up with us in the run game. And you saw the Buckeyes show up in the fourth quarter and on that final drive and say, hey, we're going to come out here, line up, let you know that we're going to run the ball, and you're not going to be able to stop us. And I feel like that's the first time we've been able to do that since J.K. Dobbins left.
And the reason it's cooler than Michigan is because they did it because they had no receiver to throw to. We did it because we wanted to. You know what I'm saying? like we made it look cool.
Absolutely. They did it out of necessity. We did it out of style.
Yeah, we did it out of style. The season is kind of softening up for us, Ron. Like the opponents coming on down the stretch aren't hyper elite. There's like obviously you play 1-7 Purdue this week with the chance to let that offensive line gel more and more. And then you get Northwestern, Indiana, then Michigan. So essentially you're getting 2 weeks to stay healthy, get the offensive line intact, and get young guys out on the field and get them some experience. What is something you want to see from Purdue this week?
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there as far as what fans should want to see out of this game. And it's two things: health and depth. The Buckeyes should be using this as an opportunity. They're getting ready to face off against a 1-7 opponent. The Buckeyes should be using this as an opportunity to rest guys that are banged up or may be needed later in the season. And there's no point in having Cody Simon rack up another 10 tackles in this game if that's a guy that you need healthy at the end of the year. And it's an opportunity for someone like an Arvell Reese to get on the field, or or Lathan Ransom, who's been dealing with injuries, is an opportunity to get Jalen McClain a start and say, hey, even if you don't play again the rest of the year, remember that game that you started last year where you got 67 snaps when it's time for his numbers called as the starter next year. I think this is a big opportunity for the Buckeyes to recognize how much of their season still remains. While it feels like they're coming through the closing stretch of the closing quarter of the season, it's really only the halfway point. And I hope the Buckeyes take this as an opportunity to not only stay healthy, but to develop their depth, because there's no point in losing starters or getting guys injured. And in these games, especially Purdue and Northwestern, that don't seem to be very much in question.
Yeah, man, guys in baseball, they call it getting off your feet. It's like when there's stretches where you're not maybe playing the best teams, it's a great chance to get young guys work and to get the older guys off their feet a little bit. And that's what these 2 weeks should be. I know people are like, oh, Purdue, they could be. No, they're not. This Purdue team stinks.
Coach K does a thing with Duke where he splits up his season into mini seasons, and I feel like this is a mini season for the Buckeyes, and they need to approach this 4-game stretch with a seriousness of almost like these are preseason games where we're getting guys healthy, we're allowing guys to get healthy and allowing our depth of play, and then preparing for these 2 big matchups to handle business here to complete the season. And I think the Buckeyes need to take full advantage of these 2 opportunities against Purdue and Northwestern to try their best to stay healthy and get their depth ready for the second half of the season. Because, I mean, Buckeye fans know, we've seen it in plenty of years past where guys start to come on towards the end of the year as they start to get more trust in practice. They're starting to get more reps and they start to work in the lineup. And you're seeing that with a guy like Brandon Ennis, someone that we haven't seen get a lot of touches, make a big play against a team like Penn State. And these last 4 games of the season are when you want to keep an eye out for a guy that starts to make splash plays and has already been making those plays in practice, earn minutes where they become a must-play type of player because of the performances that they're able to put on the field when they get their opportunities.
I'm glad you said that. This is the point in the year where Chris Olave became a must-play player. This was that point of the year as a true freshman. This is where Chris Olave started catching passes, making plays the weeks leading up to Michigan. And then obviously we know one of the great freshman performances against Michigan and kind of one that made him a fan favorite. This is big. And also like the big game for Ohio State. I know obviously the Michigan game is absolutely massive, but Indiana is going to be a chance for maybe a potential 3rd top 5 matchup for Ryan Day if they keep winning. They've been fantastic in terms of game control. They've blown everybody out. And Curt Cignetti is doing things absolutely right. And yes, Curt Cignetti is going to be a big-time coach. So getting ready for that game as well is important. But again, you want health, experience, and depth building. That's how you're supposed to treat these next 2 weeks.
Absolutely. I mean, Chris Olave, the perfect example of guys. And I feel like these are the opportunities where the Buckeyes need to take advantage and sell their message to the youth and future recruits. Like, Put your head down, stay the course, and there's a path for you. And this is how it works. And this is how you get on the field at Ohio State. It starts through special teams. It starts in practice. It starts through hard work, and you earn those minutes, and nothing's just handed to you. And guys need to make the most of these opportunities, because that's what the Buckeyes that came before them have done, and how they've become the greats and household names that we know to this day. And this is a prime opportunity for young players or guys that haven't had an opportunity to get on the field to make a name for themselves and really kickstart their careers and what could be a big season for them the following year.
I got a premonition. Special teams touchdown in the next 2 weeks.
I mean, if they are due for anything, it has to be a special teams touchdown. The Buckeyes have just been lacking across the board when it comes to special teams. I believe it's approaching a decade on a punt return. It's been over a decade on a kick return. They have not kicked a 50-yard field goal inside Ohio Stadium in almost 10 plus years. Their last one during a game was in 2019. It is absolutely time for the Buckeyes to step up on special teams. They fire their special teams coordinator and have completely delegated duties. So if they're able to improve and get a big play from special teams, I think that will be huge for the Buckeyes.
Absolutely. Get us out of here, Ron.
We appreciate Bleacher Report for having us. The Buckeyes get another top 5 matchup and potentially have another one right around the corner. Hopefully the Buckeyes can handle business this week against Purdue, a 1-7 team, an opportunity for the Buckeyes to flex their depth and get healthy. We appreciate Bleacher Report for having us for this week 11 preview. And you know how this ends. It's always go Bucks. And of course, OH.
IO.